I don't know, they all kind of look the same.
What do you mean they all look the same?
What's good, y'all? It's the Penguins Bro here. Today we have a very interesting topic on our hands. This video revolves around Kirby, the star of the show, the man that you know, the soul horror fiction. He goes by many names. Kirby is my second favorite franchise. In fact, if Sonic Frontiers flops like Forces did, he'd probably become my first favorite. And because I love his series so much, I've played all but the most obscure of Kirby games. With all that experience though, I noticed something funny about the mainline Kirby games past Superstar and up to Star Allies. They all tend to follow a similar structure. Especially starting from Return to Dreamland and onwards, I felt that these games were designed in a ritualistic fashion. Now I know you may hear that word and think,
y'all motherfuckers need Jesus.
But I don't mean ritualistic like that. I mean that certain familiar tropes in Kirby games are reintroduced in the same way for subsequent entries. What kind of tropes specifically? My plan is to go over and point out these tropes, and say why some work while others could use some shaking up. I should mention though, we recently had Kirby's beautiful transition to 3D that I love more than anything else in the world! So I'll also cover how that game improves on said tropes. Just to clarify, this video isn't me docking the Kirby franchise. I think every game mentioned in this video, yes even Star Allies, is great and unique in their own merits, even if some of the concepts are revisited. I want to bring these up because I feel like the general gaming audience steers away from Kirby because of its ritualistic design, and I want to show that this series is capable of so much more than that. Alright, I think I got my goal across. Let's get this party started! This first trend has to do with one of the best parts of the Kirby series, the boss battles. Now, there's actually multiple things I want to mention here, but none of them are about the general boss fights. The first thing I'll discuss here is the structure of the final bosses in the series. Not the main story final bosses, the harder versions of said bosses you can only find after the true arena. Have you ever noticed how ever since Superstar Ultra, the mainline games all have a boss gauntlet of some sort for you to go through? And once you do that, you unlock a tougher gauntlet with harder versions of said bosses, including the final one? Sometimes that gauntlet has extra hidden fights, like Galactonite, or brand new extra phases to the true final boss after you think you've won. Despite all that, this pattern remains super consistent. This is a repeated trope, but I actually really like this formula. Because when a Kirby game goes all out on you, that's when shit gets good. A high stakes brawl with a crazy abomination that just blows the hell out of everything. Plus the deep lore said fight provides. That's what Kirby is, man. The downside though is that this can make Kirby games pretty predictable. Especially considering how some of the newer hidden final boss forms use moves from past ones. Like, see, this fireball attack from Chaos Elfless was previously used by Void, which was previously used by Sectonia, which was used by Dracia. Or this cutter move Chaos Elfless did was previously used by Void, which was used by Sectonia, which was used by Dracia, which was used by Marks. You see how it starts to get a little old after a while? Don't even get me started on the paint move. I still love these bosses as they all have unique moves too. But if a boss's moveset is almost nothing but homages like with Chaos Elfless' form, it can get a little repetitive. Another thing I wanted to mention is the curious case of night fights. What the hell am I talking about? Well, you're used to fighting Meta Knight, obviously, he's a main character. But in most games after Superstar Ultra, at some point, you also fight another, harder Knight character, be it Galactonite, Dark Meta Knight, or Morpho Knight. These aren't copies of Meta Knight or each other by any means. In fact, these are some of the hardest fights in their games. But I just think it's interesting how this additional night fight makes its way into every game. I'm all for it though, especially with characters like Galactonite. He is sick as hell, and I hope he comes back. He's like the Sephiroth of Kirby. as you can probably tell, Forgotten Land didn't change this trope in any way. And I'm kinda glad they didn't. Having some kind of familiarity for Kirby's first 3D romp was probably a good call. And despite my earlier qualms, I still think the game did a spectacular job with these fights. It even made the parallel bosses make sense in lore. Oh, right, that's another thing I should mention. Modern Kirby games all have some harder campaign or speedrun mode where you fight harder versions of the story bosses. Sometimes, however, instead of it just being the bosses again, it's parallel versions of said bosses, who sometimes are their own characters. For example, all of the parallel bosses in Star Allies are their own characters. I guess this makes things more visually distinct? I don't know. Phantom Forgo DDD kinda rolls off the tongue. All of these parallel characters make the cast feel a little bloated, if you ask me. Everything I've mentioned so far is common practice for the franchise, and while I'd accept it if they shook things up, I'd probably miss this system since, despite everything, bosses are still my favorite part of the games, and I like having tons of them to go through. Anyway, I've said all I needed to on this topic. Let's move on to the very structure of the Kirby franchise. Next up, we have something that bound pretty much every Kirby game until Forgotten Land came out, and that would be the organization of game modes within each entry. Most of the games from Star Allies all the way back to Superstar have similarly designed menus. Even the in-between games like Squeak Squad follow the pattern of UIs to an extent. I already mentioned the boss rushes, aka the arenas, in the previous section. The normal arena pops up after finishing the main story, and the true arena usually appears after beating the game's harder campaign. Speaking of, most of the games also have either a hard mode campaign or a speedrun campaign to go through, which is usually also unlocked after finishing the main game. I'm personally more of a fan of the speedrun ones, as in those you play as a different character, or anybody in Star Allies' case, and those are also way faster to complete since, well, they're speedruns. That extra hard mode campaign is the one thing I don't like about Return to Dreamland. Playing through the entire game again just with less health and harder bosses wasn't really the move. That's not all though. All of these Kirby games also have sub-games that you can play. Superstar had a lot, but from Return to Dreamland and onwards, they've only had 2. They were all pretty good, I feel. In fact, the 3DS ones eventually became their own games outright. And those games eventually became improved Switch games. The only disappointing ones were in Star Allies. I feel like these were made solely to keep up with the tradition of having 2 sub-games in a release. Most of the Kirby traditions I'll mention in this video still have heart put into them, but those 2 sub-games are the only ones that truly just felt like an afterthought. You know what isn't an afterthought though? Forgotten Land. This game fully addressed that game mode trope and simplified the UIs. Now instead of just clicking buttons on the menu, you can navigate a small hub world to do what you need to do. In essence, the game modes are still there. The arena became the Coliseum, the hard mode campaign is Forgo Dreams, which actually changed the level design to unlike Return to Dreamland's hard mode. And even the sub-games are still around, being the fishing game and the Kirby Tilt and Tumble reference. I find this UI change way more fluid and engaging, and highlights just how much of a jump Forgotten Land was. There's still one thing that remains constant, however. When you try to delete a save file, the game sends multiple pop-ups asking if you really want to follow through with that decision, and it even plays siren noises if you're just about to do it. I guess it's just a cute way to help a kid not accidentally delete their save. Back to what I was saying, the game patterns I've shown don't feel bad in any way. I guess the reason the structure is still here is because, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I like this pattern, but I'm glad Forgotten Land presented said pattern differently, and I hope we see more of that in the future. For the final trope, I wanted to touch upon the biggest source of lore within the Kirby franchise: pause screen descriptions. You'd be surprised at how prevalent this is within the series. Starting off in Superstar Ultra, these didn't really do much aside from just give some background on whoever you were fighting. However, from Return to Dreamland and onwards, this is where the devs would start putting the juicy stuff. For most of the mainline games before Forgotten Land, pause screen descriptions were the biggest resource for people who wish to dive deeper into the characters and events of the Kirby universe. And while the stuff there is great, sometimes I can't help but feel this could be done in a better way. In Forgotten Land, this trope does see a revamp. Instead of character descriptions being in the pause screen, this time when you pause there's, well, nothing at all, as the descriptions were moved to the figurines, one of the collectibles. I think this is definitely a step up from pause screen lore, because instead of interrupting the action of the boss to read some backstory, you can do it at your own leisure when browsing your figures. This keeps the game well paced, and subtly adds to how grand the bosses are by removing that distraction. That being said, figurine lore still has a similar problem that pause screen lore has. It tells instead of shows. Everything being done in text makes the deeper lore hard to keep track of, and isn't too enticing to new fans. For example, I doubt many people know about the relationship between Haltman and Susie, or the insane death of DDD's character, or how Sectonia was corrupted into the way she was in Triple Deluxe, or the true identity of Shiverstar, or... Anyway, I think that if points like these were shown rather than told, more people would appreciate the deep lore of Kirby. I have a great example of how this can be done. An example which stems from another series with a cute mascot, yet has deep lore. That series being the legendary Starfy. You guys may be wondering why the hell I'm pulling from such a deep cut, but I assure you everything will make sense. I've only ever played the 5th Starfy game, since that was the only one to make it to the US. But after watching a wonderful video by the RPG monger, I learned something very interesting about the other 4 games. They handle lore through flashback cutscenes during the credits. I won't go too in depth on this franchise's cutscenes since this isn't a Starfy video, but they go over some pretty deep stuff. Stuff that's of similar depth to Kirby lore, I feel. And I also feel that if the Kirby series incorporated this practice into their games, people would become way more invested in the characters. I know the credit sequences as of now are pretty climactic and commemorative, but I think this approach will be more beneficial for helping people understand the Kirby universe. They'd be glad they looked into it too, as the Kirby universe has some of the best characters I have ever seen. It seems that with each new Kirby game, whether it does something new or something out of obligation, it's done with 1000% effort. And I think that from here on out, the devs can create the perfect blend of change and familiarity. Hey there viewer, thank you for watching this video through to the end. I covered how many of the games of the Kirby series felt like they had ritualistic design patterns, but I never said that was a bad thing. It's just that I've noticed these connections for a long time, and felt like highlighting them since I haven't seen anybody else talk about it. Most of my high effort videos have been about Kirby, so I'm no stranger to this subject. But I recently made a video on Sonic Frontiers that blew my channel out of the water. So if you like Sonic in any way, you should check it out. Since that video did so well, unless this video goes crazy too, I'm probably gonna have to have a sharper emphasis on Sonic for this channel. I will still do other things. For example, I have a Let's Play coming in late February, but doing more Sonic is my best shot at growing. That being said, Kirby isn't leaving this channel either. In fact, you'll see him again very soon. Hint hint. Thanks for watching, my friend, and have a wonderful day.